Hello, everyone. Happy Monday and welcome to the first of our NMT webinar series, this one entitled Managing Your Mood. Very happy to see about 250 attendees here with us today. So thankful you could join us. My name is Jordan Friesen. I am the National Director of Workplace Mental Health with the Canadian Mental Health Association. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a second. But today we are going to talk all about mood and emotion and how those two concepts can actually help you feel better at work, perform better at work, relate better to your colleagues and coworkers, and ultimately cultivate a stronger sense of mental health and well-being for yourself. So this is part of Not Myself Today, and I'm assuming all of you know what Not Myself Today is, but in case you don't, Not Myself Today is one of the foundational elements of the Canadian Mental Health Association's response to workplace mental health. So we know that all Canadians, all Americans, everybody in the world actually has mental health, and we need to take care of it. And at the Canadian Mental Health Association, we firmly believe that the workplace is the perfect place to cultivate mental health and to be able to support the 1 in 5 Canadians who are experiencing challenges with their mental health at any given point in time, as well as create the conditions for the 5 in 5 Canadians, all of us that have mental health, to be able to thrive and to live a happy, healthy, productive life. So Not Myself Today has 3 objectives: building greater awareness and understanding of mental health, reducing stigma of mental illness, and of course, fostering a safe and supportive work culture where we can all feel okay expressing that maybe we're not feeling ourselves today. And Not Myself Today was structured around the concept that it is, in fact, okay not to feel okay. So once again, my name is Jordan Friesen. I'm our National Director of Workplace Mental Health. A little bit about me: my background is actually as an occupational therapist. So I've worked in clinical settings providing services to individuals who are recovering from mental illness. And in doing so, I've had a lot of experience working with people to identify things that are impacting their mood, either positively or negatively, and helping them find strategies to reduce the impact of those triggers on their life, on their health, on their mental health and well-being. And some of that experience is going to inform our conversation today. But more about me is that this dialogue about mood is really quite personal. I've been diagnosed with major depressive disorder since I was in my late teens, early 20s. And so I understand the challenge that comes with trying to maintain a healthy mood. And so some of what we're going to talk about today is, of course, based on what's in Not Myself Today, but I'm also going to try to bring in my own experience as well to help bring it to life for you, and understand that the challenge of finding and maintaining a healthy mood is not one that is insurmountable. In fact, there are some really simple strategies that you can use and you can help others to use to actually support a really healthy mood as well. So just for some context, you've all signed up to our webinar today on managing your mood, but we do have 3 additional webinars that we're running for our Not Myself Today clients, and these are exclusive to our Not Myself Today clients, and you can register for them online. So we have 3 more webinars coming up, one on building your resilience, the other on developing your emotional intelligence, and then the third is on having difficult conversations. And I'm really excited about that one. That's going to be later on in the fall, in November. So feel free to sign up for any and all of these. Of course, they're all going to be recorded, this one as well. You'll be able to access it on the Not Myself Today members portal, and we'll have that up for you in a couple of days following this webinar. You'll also receive a link where you can view and download a copy of this webinar yourself, and that'll be sent out automatically after today. So before we get started, a couple things I just want to make sure that you're all aware of as participants. We are going to try to make this as interactive as possible today. So you'll note that on the right-hand side near the bottom, of your GoToWebinar screen, there should be a chat or question functionality. So take a minute or so to locate that now. And we're going to ask for some participation from you, the audience, to help inform some of our discussion today. And monitoring that chat, we have a couple of folks from the Canadian Mental Health Association's national office team here. So we have Alex Colo, who's going to be monitoring the chat and feeding questions over to me. And we've also got Rucha, who is here for any technical support issues, and I'll allow them to maybe just pop their names and email addresses into the chat if they get a chance. And we also have Catherine from our team also on hand for technical support issues. And these may be people actually that you've interacted with through Not Myself Today before. They're part of the team at CMHA that actually keeps Not Myself Today running. So thank you to everyone. And if you have any technical support questions, feel free to reach out through that chat box or directly through email, and they'll be able to help you out. So with that, let's get going. So we talked about this already. It's okay not to be okay. And again, CMHA National fully believes that workplaces should be a supportive environment for a number of reasons, but I've got a few reasons on the screen here. 44% of workers say that they have or have had a mental health issue or mental illness. 3 out of 5 employees in Canada have experienced a mental health issue in the past year because of work. And 2 out of 3 Canadian employees would not talk to their employer if they had a mental health problem. So for that reason, we really want to make sure that workplaces are a healthy environment for employees, because we know and believe that a healthy workplace is going to create healthy people, and those people are going to go home after work and they're going to create healthy families, healthy kids, healthy campuses, healthy schools, and healthy communities, which is of course our end goal. So let's start talking about mood, and we couldn't really talk about mood without talking about emotion as well. And so we're going to talk about both of these today, but in the most simplistic way, your mood and the emotions that you experience on a regular basis are some of the underpinnings of what an understanding of mental health and well-being is really all about. So our moods and our emotions are primarily there to help us. You know, they tell us when we're in danger, they help us understand when we might need help or what other people might be feeling or experiencing. They can point us in directions that bring joy and vitality to life. But it becomes a problem when our mood or the emotions we experience start running the show and dictating how we interact in the world. And that's a lot of what most of us experience, is that the moods that we're experiencing tend to color our view of the world. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but it changes the way we act, it changes the way we think, and sometimes for the better, but oftentimes for the worse. And we talk about mood, and most often we talk about mood in a negative sense, right? We're in a bad mood. And so we want to figure out ways to actually be more aware of the moods that we're experiencing and the emotions that are, and thoughts and actions that are driving that. And then how can we subtly and slowly, but intentionally over time, help shift our moods and cultivate moods that are actually driving us in directions that bring us joy and vitality and overall health. So when you talk about managing your moods, you know, it's important that we talk about regulating emotions and that in fact a healthy mood is key to your mental health. But this doesn't mean that you have to be like Spock from Star Trek, right? So if you're familiar with Star Trek, you know, Spock, he's an alien, and he is primarily driven by logic, and he pays no attention to his emotions, and his emotions don't impact the way he thinks, the way he makes decisions, the way he interacts with people. And when we talk about managing our moods, you know, we're not talking about becoming Spock-like, right? Emotion and mood actually can bring a lot of value to our lives. But what it means is that we can and should make a conscious choice in how and when we let our emotions and our moods guide our actions and our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. And that's what we talk about when we say managing your mood. is not about not experiencing ups and downs. It's not about ignoring emotions or feelings. It's actually just about making a conscious choice as to when we're going to let those emotions, feelings, moods drive the way we behave. So that's primarily what we're going to talk about. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about some of the basic physiology of moods and emotions, talk about some strategies to manage our moods. We're going to talk about, and this is really interesting, some thought traps and how we can avoid them. And then we're going to end off our conversation talking about how this discussion about mood and emotion actually helps foster a psychologically safe and supportive work environment, which is exactly what Not Myself Today is aimed to do. So first and foremost, what I want to do to kick things off is to ask you, and this is that audience participation part, how are you feeling today? So I want you to take even 10 seconds and actually stop and pause and intentionally think about how you're feeling. And I'd like to hear from at least a few of you. We've got about 300 people on our webinar today. So how are you feeling? And if you want to enter that in the chat box, let's see if we can populate a couple of responses here, and I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to do it. I'll happy to get things started myself. I am feeling optimistic today is maybe where I'll start. I'm feeling optimistic. Oh, thank you. They're rolling in. I love it. So we've got tired, sleepy, content, foggy. Foggy. There's a fair bit of foggy on a Monday. Happy. Tim, glad you're feeling happy today. Foggy Dion. Busy Brian. Peachy Matt. Peachy Mandy rather. Peachy. So there's a lot going on here. And invariably, so many responses. Some very similar, some very different, as you might expect. One thing I'll flag as well is that if you've marked your mood in the Not Myself Today portal today, perhaps you use the functionality that allows you to mark why you're feeling that way. So I'd encourage you on your own, even just to take a minute just to think about why you might be feeling the way you're feeling. And maybe it's because it's Monday. But we developed this activity importantly because it's helpful for us to understand our moods and to take a step back, to see if there's anything we can do to shift a mood that isn't great and know that's where we're at when we're interacting with the people that work with us. So thinking about what actually puts you in a good or bad mood is actually a really helpful place to start when we're trying to understand our moods and how they either bring us joy and vitality or move us into a headspace that is maybe less productive or healthy than what we would like. So I'm seeing a lot of overwhelmed, foggy, peaceful, tired. So thank you everyone for sharing. Really appreciate that. And so this is really important, of course, for a number of reasons, but basically mood is kind of the lens that we look at the world through. So Stephen Covey has a great quote here. It says, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." So mood is, in a nutshell, the glasses that we put on to look at everything in the world. Moods are a kind of a general feeling, right? They're not a specific reaction to a situation. That's an emotion. That's an emotional response. A mood is more general than that. It's more subtle. It tends to persist longer, and they're non-specific, right? So they're not associated with necessarily a specific action. They're sort of the result of a culmination rather. Of actions, of thoughts, of behaviors, of experiences that we've had that tend to either positively or adversely impact our general sense of feeling about life, the world, and ourselves within it. Now, it's important to know that moods aren't inherently good or bad. And this is something that we focus on a lot, certainly within Not Myself Today, is trying to get past the sense that a good mood is good and a quote unquote bad mood is bad. Moods all serve a different purpose, right? It's a reflection of how we're interpreting and experiencing the world around us. Sometimes moods are quite adaptive, right? And they motivate us to seek help. They motivate us to seek support. But moods in general, we think about as either pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant, or perhaps low or elevated. Good and bad, I would say, is maybe a more rudimentary way to think about mood, and in fact doesn't reflect the reality that moods are what they are. They're neither inherently good nor bad. It's just a reflection of how we're experiencing the world. So that's what moods are. So if and importantly, moods and emotions both, I mean, aren't necessarily rational, right? Um, so it's not necessarily a rational reaction to something that's happened, because moods and emotions as well, they're influenced by a lot of things, including our brain chemistry and the way we're sort of hardwired as well. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But understanding your mood is important because you can respond more appropriately to situations. You can draw from some of your own awareness and emotional intelligence and work on self-regulation. You can balance your reactions and stay aligned with your values when you have to make difficult decisions, and you can ultimately act in ways that serve your longer-term goals and interests versus what feels like something you need to do in the moment. And this is why tracking your mood is such a helpful practice, because we can identify trends or patterns in how we're feeling over time and reflect on how that may be impacting the way we think, feel, and act. And that think, feel, and act connection is really important, and something that we're going to talk about also in a little bit when we talk about those thinking traps. So the way we think, feel, and act are actually very intricately connected, and they tend to feed off of one another. And that feeding off of one another can either spiral you upwards into a really pleasant and joyful and helpful mood, or downwards into an unpleasant or low mood as well. Now, so that's mood. If we can think about mood as the lenses and the glasses that we look at the world through, then what is emotion? And I would say emotion are short bursts and that are generally driven by reaction to things that happen to us. So emotions are things like fear, anger, sadness, and these tend to be, we were talking about these emotions, fear, anger, sadness. They were developed really by our brains to keep us safe from danger. Moods tend to be shorter, emotions tend to be shorter and more intense than moods. Again, triggered by a series of responses that actually happen very quickly within our brain and our body to drive action. Right? So emotion really comes out of this flight or fight response that developed early on in human nature. And our brains are constantly assessing the environment around us, the physical environment, the social environment, the interpersonal environment, and really try to identify threats, right? Things that could hurt us or harm us. And our brains are always assessing for threat. And this assessment obviously happens quite quickly. This comes from a part of our brain that is called the limbic system, and in particular, a part of our brain called the amygdala. And that's in a fairly primitive part of our brain, not in the nice, fluffy white part, gray matter rather, on the top of our brain. It's further down towards our brainstem. And the amygdala takes input both from all of our senses and also our memories as well, and a few other places from our brain. And that's where those emotional assessments happen. And so, way back when in our evolution, this served us really well, right? Fear said, run from that hairy mammoth or saber-toothed tiger. Disgust said, don't eat that berry, it's not good for you, right? Anger said, attack that enemy. But in our modern complex world, where context and nuance is important, those constant emotionally driven assessments can actually be quite complicated and often get in the way of really adaptive functioning. So, the fact that our brain is constantly interpreting our environment and our emotions are often driven out of reaction to that environment, you can see how mood overall could really start backseat driving through all of this, in that if our mood overall is somewhat blasé or somewhat down, that tends to feed into our amygdala and actually color the way we assess the environment around us. And so those assessments can be colored by the lenses we're looking through. And so the emotions that come as a response can also be colored through those same lenses. So for example, and I'm just going to go back here a second. If you can think about a time when you were in an overall bad mood and you were confronted with something new or unexpected, you made a snap decision about it and reacted in a way that you regretted later. So, I mean, an example for me, for instance, could be that I was under really tight deadlines at work and feeling a lot of pressure to get things done. And somebody gave me some feedback on something that I had produced a little while ago. And that feedback actually really caused me to get quite upset and angry and rather short with my coworker. In part because the overall lens I was looking through was that of feeling quite unpleasant as far as my mood goes, because there was this really tough deadline. So you can see that our mood and the lenses we're looking through can color the things that happen around us and actually drive different emotional responses than we would like. So again, reinforcing the fact that being able to understand and to regulate and manage your mood can actually have really positive benefits from an emotional health perspective, as well as from an interpersonal health perspective as well. Now, as we mentioned back in saber-toothed tiger days, our brains are primarily wired for negativity, right? And that our brains are trained to perceive threats, right? And in essence, the work that our limbic system does to help cultivate those unpleasant emotions that inspire action for the sake of self-preservation is really sort of the foundation of what we call stress, right? Fear, anger, disgust, those are really some of the fundamental formative elements of that constitute how we experience stress in today's day and age. And our brains are hardwired for that type of negative filter, because identifying those threats is what has kept us alive. And this is not to say that all stress or all negativity is bad. In fact, that's not the case. Some of those emotions, some of those emotional interpretations, environmental assessments that generate stress in us, that generate a feeling of fear or anxiousness, etc., are to some degree good for our performance, right? So, there's as you see on the screen, there's this area of best performance, which is defined by having at least a little bit of pressure. And that's how we actually perform. That's what motivates action. So, when we talk about fear and anger and disgust, we talk about them often as things we don't want to experience, but also recognizing that sometimes a little bit of fear is actually really, really motivating. So I work from home, for example, and I have this, tinge of fear when it's 4 o'clock and I know that my partner's going to be coming home and I haven't done the dishes yet or made the bed, right? So there's that little bit of fear that actually comes into me and really actually motivates me to go take care of all that stuff before they get home, so I don't have an unhappy partner for the rest of the evening. So that's what we would call negative or unpleasant emotion. But pleasant moods and emotions like joy and contentment and pride and love are also things that, of course, we want to be experiencing, but they don't generate the same kind of urgency in our nervous system, right? So fear as a primary emotion actually generates a really specific sort of fight or flight response and call to action that lets us do something. But things like joy and pride don't actually generate that same fundamental emotional limbic system response. But we want to experience them because they actually allow a much broader range of behavioral responses than that fight or flight response, right? Feeling joyful and feeling content and feeling love and interest actually opens up a much wider range of actions to us, right? It's not just fight or flight. This is what allows us to be creative, to inspire, to learn new things, to explore and be flexible in our thinking. Right, so these types of emotions are also really good for us. The challenge is that our brains are not hardwired to actively identify situations in the environment that cultivate these emotions for us. And that's one of the tricks, right, that we're going to talk about is identifying those things that are happening around us in a more intentional way that generate positive emotion, right, that change the way we think and see the world over time so that our mood tends to be more pleasant or positive or functional. So, for example, I recently had someone at work give me really positive feedback on a piece of work that I've done. And that actually made me feel quite proud. And feeling quite proud actually caused me to step back and look at the totality of this project that I've been involved in and actually think about it in a way that encouraged me to stay engaged with it, encouraged me to put my best foot forward in terms of getting it done. And if I hadn't taken the time to actually reflect on how that feedback had made me feel, I probably wouldn't have experienced all of that and would have just kept going in a similar fashion without feeling that sense of engagement, that sense of pride, that sense of wanting to do things, a sense of wanting to do things differently. It's an interesting comment from, I think it's Terry here, and I'm just seeing this now, feeling like children can tap into this a lot more than adults can. And I would say you're absolutely right. There's a lot that teaches adults to mute and moderate the effect of their emotions. And in a lot of ways, that's functional and adaptive. But with children, it's all on their sleeves at all times, and that's not always functional. But it does actually serve in a way to cultivate, I think, a really accurate experience of the world around them, right? That's part of how they learn. So absolutely, I agree that children have a much better or a much easier time doing this. And Leah is saying, live in the moment, and you're actually right. I mean, that's fundamentally what this is about: is being able to step back and actually think about how you're experiencing the world around you, and letting that impact the way you're thinking and feeling and behaving. So mood is ultimately reinforced by these feelings that we have. It's also reinforced by the way we think about things and the things that we actually take action to do. Recognizing pleasant feelings is one way to, bit by bit, shift the lens our mood is providing to us. So sort of retint our glasses over time. So bit by bit, recognizing the things that give us pleasure, the things that give us joy, the things that give us contentment actually serve over time to slowly change the shade that we're looking through in the lens that our mood provides us. So moods and emotions can be really great company, but they're the best kind of company when they're not driving the car, right? So when we're able to take a step back and understand what our mood is, or understand the specific emotional reactions that we're experiencing, those can be really helpful and adaptive. But when we let our decisions be driven by those things, we tend to do things maybe that are impulsive. We tend to do things maybe that don't line up with our values, don't line up with our goals, and that's when it becomes a challenge. So when mood and emotion are actually in the driver's seat, that's when we see a lot of dysfunction, right? At work or in our personal lives, and that's in some sense the foundation of an illness like major depressive disorder, is that mood tends to occupy a large space in someone's consciousness, And that tends to drive a lot of the behavior that we see from people that are experiencing depression, which would be things like isolating themselves, difficulty motivating themselves to get things done because it's just not worth it, right? And so when moods are driving, we tend to not be as functional as we would like. But when they're in the car, they are in fact great company, and they can add a lot of value to what we're experiencing, as long as we don't let them dominate the conversation. Now, there are a few things here that we're just going to pause and take a break, in terms of talking about things you can do to shift subtly your mood over time. And we're going to break down a few of these in the next half hour or so before we finish up. Things like trying to do something nice for yourself, reframing some of your thoughts. Again, we're going to talk about that. Reaching out for support, and of course, exploring some of the Not Myself Today tools and resources that are there for you. And then, of course, finally, if you find that your moods or your emotions really are, in fact, in the driving seat more often than not, and they're impacting your ability to do the things you want and need to do in life, that might be a really good time to reach out to a mental health professional like a therapist, social worker, or psychiatrist. Now, before we move on, I know that there are a bunch of questions pouring in, and so I want to thank you for that. So please keep them coming. Alex is actually going to filter those out, and she's going to pass some of them along to me at the end of our webinar. So there's one here that I've just spotted. Aren't there times when it is appropriate to express healthy anger, outrage, and the so-called negative emotions? And absolutely, yes. There's no question, yes. And the message here is not that we want all of us to be experiencing and expressing positive emotions all the time. In fact, experiencing and expressing the quote unquote negative emotions are also a part of our human experience. And again, using the word negative emotions with air quotes, right? Because emotions aren't positive or negative, they just are. They're a response to what happens around us. And so there's absolutely opportunity where it's appropriate to express anger and outrage in, of course, very healthy ways. So I definitely don't want to discount that. So thank you for the question. I can't see who asked it, but I appreciate that a lot. So again, we're going to have time for questions at the end of our webinar today, and we're going to make sure we get through as many as we can. So let's keep moving. What I want to talk about is actually a resource that exists within Not Myself Today. And in the Managing Mood module online, you'll find a resource called Train Your Brain to Master Your Mood. Now, the Managing Your Mood resources are actually some of the most popular within Not Myself Today. This is where the mood buttons come in. And so I want to break down some of the insights from this particular resource, Train Your Brain to Master Your Mood, because it's actually really quite valuable, and actually I think gives a little bit more structure and context to the conversation we've just been having around how thoughts, emotions, and actions are all sort of connected to create our experience of mood. So first, let's take a look at a concept that I want to talk about. It's called ANTs. And ANTs are automatic negative thoughts. Okay. So an automatic negative thought is the immediate thought that comes into your brain when something happens around you, right? Maybe someone says something to you, maybe something happens in your world around you, maybe you spill your coffee on your shirt before the morning. Automatic negative thoughts, and these are like the intrusive thoughts that come into our brain when something happens, right? So they could be things like, oh, I'm a terrible person, I'm no good at anything, this stuff always happens to me, right? These are things that most of us can relate to. We all have these thoughts flowing through our heads at just about any point in time throughout the day. So these automatic negative thoughts rather, tend to lead to negative emotional responses, and negative meaning unpleasant emotional responses. And those unpleasant emotional responses often drive actions which are unhelpful to our situation, okay? And those unhelpful actions then, of course, put us in a worse situation, create more automatic negative thinking. So let's walk through an example of this. And this is one that's on that worksheet. So for example, your manager sends you an email late Sunday night and asks to meet with you first thing in the morning on Monday. Your first thought is, oh great, what did I do this time, right? There's that automatic negative thought, right? Oh great, what did I do this time? You think that, and then feelings start bubbling up inside of you, right? You feel anxious, right? You feel a little bit hopeless. You feel a little bit frustrated. And as a result, right, you stay up late thinking about this, right? You get a terrible sleep, and you wake up the next morning and you're tired, and you think to yourself, great, my week is already ruined, right? So we saw there an initial automatic negative thought, right? That is, oh great, what did I do this time? Led to an unhelpful emotion, right? Or a series of unhelpful emotions, potentially anxiety, frustration, which led to unhelpful actions, staying up late, thinking about it, ruminating over it, and then waking up in the morning to an additional automatic negative thought saying, my week is ruined already, okay? I think this is something that we can all relate to. And in the question bar, I see, someone already asking, how do you break that automatic negative thought cycle, right? Sometimes it seems to be a circle, and in fact, it is. It tends to be a very ruminating type of circle where we go from a negative thought to a negative or unhelpful feeling to an unhelpful action, which leads to more automatic negative thinking. And so one of the keys to breaking this circle is through breaking down what these ants are and finding ways to actually combat those negative thoughts. And going through this circle over and over and over and over again, this is what actually culminates in moods that are unpleasant or unhelpful or perceived as negative, right? You can see how going through this cycle over and over and over again would tend to color the way that you view the entire world around you. And it's actually the truth. So breaking this cycle that starts with these automatic negative thoughts is one of the keys to actually reframing things that happen in your life and cultivating a more pleasant or helpful or positive mood. So how do we do that? So what I've got up here on the screen for you are what I call thinking traps, okay? And this is, again, straight out of that great resource that you've got online through Not Myself Today. Now, these come from an area of therapy, talk therapy, called cognitive behavioral therapy. We're not going to get into that today, but basically the goal of that therapy is for anybody to help identify those automatic negative thoughts that they have and find ways to help reframe them. So what we have up here are the top 10 unhelpful thinking traps. And many of these you can probably relate to on your own as well. So for instance, black and white thinking, right? You can only see things in good or bad, perfection or failure. There's no middle ground, right? Jumping to conclusions is another one. It's number 7 on the list here. This is exactly what happened in that example that we just talked about, right? Your manager sends you an email on Sunday night asking for a meeting first thing in the morning. And what do? You jump to conclusions to say, well, what did I do wrong now, right? And these automatic negative thoughts often have no basis in reality, right? They're things that we think and our brain has trained us to think about first because ultimately it's trying to protect us, right? So a couple of my favorites, ones that I'm very prone to, personalization, right? Where I feel if people are doing something, it's my fault, or if things happen that are bad, it's because of something I've done. Jumping to conclusions, right? We just talked about that one. That's one that I often fall victim to. Overgeneralization is another one, and I see this one all the time. Something bad happens and you overgeneralize to say, well, that happens to me all the time, right? Or as we've seen here on the screen, right? If you give a poor speech once, the automatic negative thought would be, well, I can't speak in public at all without messing up. I'm no good at it at all, right? So we overgeneralize based on one small experience. So I'd be interested to see, as you read this list, even if you want to pop a few into the chat, what are the ones that you fall victim to most often? What are the automatic negative thoughts that you fall victim to most often? Or what's the thinking trap, rather? Jumping to conclusions, disqualifying the positive, yep, personalization, all of them. Thanks for being so candid, Priya. Should statements are another one. Oh my goodness. Black and white thinking, right? Oh, and there's so many, And so, Monica, right? Disqualifying the positive, right? Thinking that, compliments are never genuine or to be taken seriously. So there's so many here, and you start to realize that these common thinking traps, when you break it down, these thoughts often aren't grounded in reality. And if we can actually take these automatic negative thoughts and identify when we're falling into one of these traps, then we can actually reframe that thought. And if we reframe it, that new thought can hopefully generate a more helpful or positive or pleasant emotional response and can actually cause us to act or behave differently. And so that is the key towards disentangling yourself from that automatic negative thought cycle that we just talked about, is identifying when those automatic negative thoughts are popping up, and then recognizing when you're falling into one of these thinking traps. So how do you battle those automatic negative thoughts, right? So something comes into your mind and you recognize that you've fallen into a thinking trap. So what are some common ways that you can actually dig yourself out of that thought trap and more balanced or accurate thought that reflects the situation that's happened? So the first one I would suggest is to ask yourself the question, what's the evidence to support the way I'm thinking, right? So this is really helpful, for example, when you find yourself jumping to conclusions. So when a manager emails me at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night and asks for a meeting first thing the next morning, and my thought is, oh great, I must have messed up, right? So thinking through, well, what's the evidence to support that thought, right? Am I assuming that that's why my manager wants to meet with me, right? What does the evidence of our relationship say about why my manager might be wanting to meet with me first thing Monday morning, right? Is there evidence to support the fact that I have messed up or made a mistake, or does the evidence in fact say that, well, maybe my manager wants to meet with me because there's a new pressing deadline for our team that we need to get working on first thing, right? Another way to think about battling negative thoughts is thinking about it in terms of what's the worst that could happen, right? So this is really helpful, for example, when we talk about personalization, right? Oh my gosh, that all happened because of me, and if I don't do something, everything's gonna fall apart, right? So taking a step back and saying, well, actually, what's the worst that can happen, right? And often the worst that can happen is really actually not that bad at all. I often tell my colleagues, and we have a joke around the office, if we don't do this, is anybody going to die, right? And that's a really extreme scenario. But taking that lens kind of brings us back to the fact that, well, actually the worst that could happen here is maybe somebody gets mad because we didn't send them an email when we were supposed to, right? And in the grand scheme of things, that's actually not such a big deal, okay? Other questions that you can ask, is this something I can control? So we spend a lot of time upset and anxious about things that we simply have no control over. And if we can ask ourselves that question and recognize that we actually don't have control over it, the power of that automatic negative thought really tends to diminish. And then finally, what's good about this, right? So we're often so hardwired to look at the negative, taking a step back when things happen. And instead of thinking about the negative, right, those automatic negative thoughts that come in, let's try thinking about the positive, right? So, I overslept my alarm, for instance, right? The automatic negative thought is, oh my goodness, I'm going to be late for work. I'm going to miss this first meeting. People are going to think that I'm lazy. I'm not going to get my work done, right? But if we actually take a step and reframe that and say, well, what's good about this? It can fundamentally change our emotional response and the actions we take, right? So what's good about this might be, oh, well, you know what? Now I get to take my child to school. Now I get to have coffee with my spouse before I go to work, right? Well, now I don't have to go to that meeting because, well, I didn't really want to anyway. So using these questions to help combat automatic negative thoughts can ultimately help change the emotional response, and then also fundamentally change the behavioral response as a result. So, outside of those automatic negative thoughts, there are some other things that we know can help increase those positive emotional responses and over time cultivate a more balanced, positive, or functional mood, right? It could be things like going for a walk with a friend, picking up a new hobby, buying yourself fresh flowers, taking a break, and in Not Myself Today, it could be doing a mindful moment like a meditation, or even completing a mission possible, a random act of kindness. Now, these might seem like really simple things, really silly things, right? Really elementary things in some ways, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's through the regular application and habit of really simple things like this that allow us to experience a more balanced emotional reality that actually over time cultivate a healthier, more functional mood as well. So things that make us feel good at work, making progress on a project, positive interactions with our colleagues, having autonomy, feeling supported, being recognized. These are all things that you can recognize, right? Try to identify when they happen to you and allow yourself to feel that little bit of positive emotional or pleasant emotional state, okay? These are also things that you can actually help your colleagues identify as well, okay? And help them move from those automatic negative thoughts to a more balanced or positive assessment of the situation around them. And as Alex has indicated in the chat, these are in fact all evidence-based things that do make a difference at work. So in terms of leaders, some things that you can do along with the tools within Not Myself Today would be, of course, to support staff to help craft their work to be meaningful to them. Right? The more we find meaning in the work we do, we're more likely to cultivate those positive emotional states. Promote opportunities to innovate and learn, support the importance of work-life balance, and of course, find ways to strengthen relationships among team members. When you see someone struggling or not acting like themselves, reach out and ask if there's something that you can do to support them. And in particular, if you as a supervisor or manager see colleagues struggling with those ants, those automatic negative thoughts, you can actually gently push and probe and test them and actually encourage them to test the reality and the evidence to support the way they're thinking as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on. There's some time for question and answer. And so I'm going to invite Alex maybe to curate a couple of questions that have emerged through the audience. We've got about 10 minutes for question and answer, and then we've got some time just to wrap up everything we've learned today. So Alex, maybe if you want to flag for me, what are a couple of questions that have emerged throughout our hour today? All right, so we've got a couple questions here. One that I'll pick out here is from Olga. Hi, Olga. And Olga asked, are there any tools like a worksheet that can help employees manage ants? And you know, within Not Myself Today, we don't have any there, but what I can be sure to do, Olga, is actually send some recommended resources out along with the follow-up from this webinar. There's a couple of really great websites with whole booklets around automatic negative thoughts, how to identify them, and how to combat them. So we can be sure to include some suggested resources there as well. So here's another one. I'll put this out from Teresa. And so Teresa says, isn't the problem with looking for evidence to support while in negative thoughts, particularly some of the other traps, is that you'll find evidence and discount the positive that disproves your defined evidence, right? So I think what you're getting at here, Teresa, is that you could go back and forth on evidence to disqualify your negative thinking over and over and over and over and over again. And you could follow that rabbit hole really deeply. I think the key is to try to take a step back and try to at least have as balanced and evidence-based approach as you can. And I often think about it and say, you know, if this were my friend, right, or a good colleague of mine, or a spouse or partner, would they also say that this is valid evidence, right? And that's maybe a test you can use yourself to avoid that rabbit hole of trying to find evidence on both sides of the equation, is to ask, you know, if this was a really good friend of mine, would they also agree that this is valid evidence? And so then I'll try to find one more here. So this is from Jody. How do you combat the negative thought streaming of constantly doubting how you think people are taking what we say? For example, we think we have a great conversation with our managers, then later dissecting the conversation over and over and over until we think the manager took our conversation as a negative instead. Well, I think the less you can ruminate on that kind of stuff, the better, quite ultimately. You know, the tendency to overanalyze our interactions and our conversations very rarely leads us in a positive direction. I think the best metric of you know, how you know, in this example, how a conversation netted out was really what's the behavioral outcome as a result, right? So you could analyze it up and down all day, but ultimately, are you seeing the outcome that you're looking for? And if so, consider that a success. There's a few other questions here. The last one I'll talk about maybe is, this is from Nick, and thanks, Nick. How could or could environment affect our mood? And this is a great question. And so managing your mood, you know, obviously there's a lot of things that go beyond just the way you think and interpret things that happen to you that do have a positive impact on your mood, right? So there's a connection, of course, between you know, exercise and mood. So for example, one of the best evidence-based treatments for a major depressive disorder, for example, is in fact good old-fashioned exercise. And this is not to discount any of those things. You know, exercise, social support, healthy relationships, purpose and meaning in the things that you're doing, those are all things that are good for your mental health, as well as good for, generally speaking, your mood as well. So don't discount them. They are absolutely good for impacting your mood in a positive sense. So thank you all. I know there's so many more questions, and we probably don't have time again. And Terry, you've mentioned as well that these are social determinants of health, and some of it is. And there's a large evidence base to be said for, you know, the fact that our health is determined by a lot of things beyond just ourselves and our own skills and abilities. And I certainly agree that that's an area across Canada where we could be doing better work. It's one of the foundations of mental health promotion. So What I want to do before we leave is just remind you of a few upcoming webinars we had. If you've enjoyed this one, and I apologize, there's been so many questions, we haven't gotten to all of them. But join us for a couple of our other webinars. We've got Building Your Resilience, October 3rd, Emotional Intelligence, October 8th, and Having Difficult Conversations, November 4th. So this is going to be a really great one. It's going to be super interactive for those of you that are in positions where you often find yourself having to have difficult conversations within the workplace. We're going to talk through some really concrete ways to make those conversations easier. In the meantime, if you have any additional questions about anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out. You can email us at notmyselftoday@cmha.ca, and those questions will be passed along to our team, and we'll try to get answers for you as best we can. Otherwise, thank you so much for your participation, and we will look forward to seeing you next on October 3rd. So thanks a lot, and have a fantastic Monday, everyone.